in 45 minutes I've been given to talk about packet flow, which is impossible. I am going to touch on some of the layer 2 changes that came in with bridge hardware offloading, because a lot of the problems that I get involved with fixing are due to not understanding where the packet has gone through router OS. And that understanding of packet flow enables you to use these devices to their best ability. So quickly, I work for a company called ITX. We are based in the United Kingdom. We deliver training and consultancy. We have 2 training bases, one up north and one down south. I started networking a very long time ago. Been using router OS for a long time, and I have been training for feels like a long time, but it's only about 6 years. And by using features correctly and understanding the packet flow, you will not run into as many problems. So I'm sure everybody is very aware and very familiar with the packet flow diagram on the wiki. I look at it regularly. Maybe I'm sad. But they added in this flow of hardware offloaded packet if you have hardware offloaded interfaces with the switch chip. As Lorenzo said, I was quite instrumental in the production of the new switching course, the MTC SWE, because this lack of understanding of what happens. So if we add in bridge hardware offloading, which, to make it even more complicated for you, there are a number of different scenarios and features that may or may not let you use bridge hardware offloading, and there are different switching features depending on the hardware. This here is a very small extract from the wiki page. If you want to know the lot, then go and read the wiki page, link in the slide deck. There are features in the bridging function that if you enable them will disable hardware offloading, and there are some features that do not apply if you are running hardware offloading. If you want to know more, come on the switching course and you can spend half a day getting your head around it all, and then you will understand it. There are some features that only disable hardware offloading on an interface when applied. And here be an extract from the table from the wiki that was up to date at the time of writing. And this hardware offloading has added a new section to the packet flow diagram, and if you have a device with a switch chip, then we add in the switching decision as well as now the routing decision for layer 2 packets. Some of it is running on the switch chip, and some of it is running inside router OS. And packets that are flowing through the switch function only are not visible most of the time in router OS, and you wonder why you can't see them. And the switching function contains 2 main new features to help us understand packet flow. We have the switching decision and the switch CPU port. The switching decision controls some switching level functions: host learning, packet forwarding to decide where it's going to go next. It has some filtering in it, and it does now no longer have, as of yesterday, because this got changed in the wiki yesterday to keep me on my toes, that rate limiting has now moved somewhere. They haven't said where. VLAN tagging can be carried out in the switching decision, and port mirroring has now also been deleted from the list of functions in the switching decision yesterday. So here be an interesting presentation that got altered this morning. The switch CPU port is a special purpose port that is where the packets flow when they are leaving the switching decision, going into the bridging decision, and then can go higher up in the packet flow to layer 3, or the actual router OS function is running in the CPU. you cannot apply any router OS configuration to the CPU switch port, but you can use the switch CPU port in functions that are controlled on the switching function, and I will show that right at the end of the presentation. If packets go through the switching, or the switch CPU port, sorry, into router OS as a bridge port, then the in interface still carries through, and router OS sees it with its in interface, not the switch CPU port. We have now 3 new switching packet flows to switched packets. In the switching decision, we have switch forward, switch input, and switch output. When it flows between 2 switch ports with hardware offloading enabled, very simply, it runs at switch forward, not bridge forward. And very simply, goes through. The switch checks whether the in interface is hardware offloaded, makes a switching decision. The switching decision decides that it is also a hardware offloaded port and bypasses everything else. As long as it has learnt it, if it has not learnt it, then all packets will be flooded out of all ports, including switch CPU, so that it can learn it to update the host table. Switch input is used, the packet flow, in one of 2 scenarios. Switch input is where traffic is leaving the switching function to go higher up, either at bridging, so it's still layer 2, or layer 3, or input into the CPU function. And there is 2 routes there. It can go through the switching decision to make that decision, or having made the hardware offloaded question and realize it is not a hardware offloaded input, it will go and bypass the switching decision and just go into router OS. Yeah. And we can also copy packets to the switch CPU port using switch rules, and that is not going to talk any more about that today. And then we have switch output. Switch output can also be layer 2. Don't forget that this is not the layer 3 functions in the firewall, where output is traffic leaving the CPU functions itself, the software, but this could still be layer 2 traffic, and this output switch function could be layer 2 coming from the bridge interface, having followed through packet flow. Again, there are 2 output routes. It can go direct out if the out interface is not hardware offloaded, or if it is an out interface is hardware offloaded, it will also go through the switching decision. So, we can now, or get ourselves slightly confused, as soon as we combine hardware and software interfaces, or ports that are hardware offloaded and ports that are not hardware offloaded. And that is where we combine, or make use of, or not make use of, depending on your configuration, ports, both the software, the switching functions and the bridging functions to our layer 2 packets. So I thought we'd have a look at actually looking what happens. So I took what to me is quite a common device. I have used loads of them. I have taken a HAP AC squared, because I had one on my desk. And I have connected to it 4 wired devices. And I applied a very basic bridge config, but I disabled hardware offloading on 2 of them, so that we can see how we may use the bridging features and how we will use the switching features. It is also, people forget or don't realize they exist, that when you are looking at your hardware, MikroTik produces these lovely block diagrams that show how everything is connected. And we can see here with the HAP AC squared that our 5 Ethernet ports are connected to the switch, and that our wireless interfaces are not. They are going straight into the CPU. We can look here at the features table, and I can see here that my HAPAC squared will let me support the most reason for showing this is I'm going to show switch rules, and I have got the HAPAC squared that will let me create up to 92 switch rules, so good. Switch rules will apply on this device. And the HAPAC squared will use hardware offloading as long as I don't enable certain functions, and I have not enabled those functions, so I am still running a hardware offloaded bridge, so I can use the switching function. If I was to take my HAPAC squared and turn on bridge VLAN filtering, I no longer can use the software function features because I have taken that out of the equation. So, very simply, I flow some traffic through PC1 and PC2. They are both in hardware offloaded ports. So the packet flow very simply does that. Checks whether it's an interface, makes the switching decision because it knows it's in the host table, and goes out. We take traffic from PC1 to PC4. PC4 is connected to Ether4, so I didn't get confused in this modeling, and PC4 is not hardware offloaded, so the traffic goes more like this. And what that actually looks like in reality is the traffic makes a decision, and it says, is interface hardware offloaded? Yes. Great. So we go to the switching decision. The switching decision looks at the host. The host realizes that the output destination is not directly connected to the switch chip, so it goes via the switch CPU port, and yes, it's a bridge port, so we go into the bridging function because we're still at layer 2. And we tootle our way through the bridging function. We're not using IP firewall, we make a bridging decision, we go through bridge forward, we're not using IP firewall, and then we leave through switch CPU on the switch output chain. So this packet here has gone switching through switch input into the bridge, and now on switch output. Now, traffic flow between PC3, which is not hardware offloaded, and a hardware offloaded PC is very, very similar in its flow. And it looks like that. But it, this time, excludes itself from the switching decision on the first part and just goes straight into the bridging function. And non-hardware offloaded to non-hardware offloaded, PC3 to PC4, follows a very similar flow, just does not use either of the switching decisions. So, as well as looking at it using the packet flow, we can control layer 2 traffic in a number of ways. We have the bridge filter, and we have switch rules, and a number of other things. So what I have done now is I thought that I would apply some of these features of limiting traffic. I'm just going to look at bridge filter rules and look at switch rules and see where and when I block traffic using these functions. Because I run into people doing this stuff and wonder, I've applied these rules because I want to use layer 2 block my traffic because it's either near my source, or I want to create some layer 2 isolation, reduce my layer 2 traffic. So I apply a bridge filter rule. Bridge filter rule is quite simply, I've decided to block port 80 because it was easy to demo. And I have a web server running on some of these devices. So, can PC1 get to PC2? Can it get to PC4? What happens about loading a web page on my router? And can I get to the internet? And I have applied this in the forward chain. Bridge filter forward sits here in my packet flow. And let's look what happens. So, can I get to the web server on PC2? Both ports are hardware offloaded. I load my web page absolutely fine, even though I have created a rule that blocks all forward layer 2 traffic for TCP port 80, but I did it as a bridge rule. I blocked it there. My traffic has gone nowhere near there, so I am allowed to get to what I wanted to get to, and my administrator or I have not blocked it for my users. Right, so there's also a web server running on PC4, and that does not load. So I have blocked some traffic, not all traffic. I am sitting here scratching my head thinking what has happened. But if we look at the packet flow, we see what did happen. Because it went via switch CPU, because the output was not hardware offloaded, my bridge filter this time applied. And if without looking at the packet flow, it is very easy to sit there scratching our head thinking, but why did it work now and why didn't it work before? Great, well, can I stop people getting to WebFig on my router? Yeah, normally would mostly disable it, but it's a good screenshot for demo because it's all using the same ports, and it loads absolutely fine. I have not blocked it. Why? Well, it's gone through the bridging function, but this is not bridge forward traffic, this is bridge input into the higher up functions inside the router packet flow, which is not shown on these screens. And getting on the internet, this is bridging, not IP level, so it is not forward traffic. I load a HTTP website, there are not very many around, but this one always responds on port 80. And I load the page absolutely fine, because just in the same way of going to WebFig, that at layer 3, if we were in the IP firewall filter, would have been input, and this would have been forward, it is still bridge input. And again, that flow of what is input at layer 2 to what is forward at layer 3 also can confuse people if you do not look at the packet flow diagram. Great. So, let's look what happens when I use bridge input rules. Bridge input, do the same as before. It is sitting here in the packet flow. Can I get to the web server on PC2? Yeah, I can still load it, because as we saw before, follows the same route, therefore it's not going to hit it. But my bridge input, is it going to block my web server on PC4? Last time we couldn't load this page, and now we can, because I have followed the forward route to the bridge function. But an input rule here blocks WebFig. If we're in the layer 3 function, we remember this is input, and it has blocked it. And websites, because we can see there, and websites on the internet are also now blocked because it is bridge input, and it's very important not to get confused between bridge input and IP firewall input. Layer 2, layer 3, what is relationally input and forward is very different. There. Right. So, switch rules. I have created a switch rule. I have a device that supports switch rules, so I can create them, and they will work on this device. Switch rules sit here in the switching function. Switch rules only apply on ingress. My switch rule there is desport 80, ether 1, because that is where my device is coming from. I'm testing from ether 1, so I've applied the rule to run on ether 1 because it has to run on ingress. Protocol TCP, switch 1, I only have one switch in my device. And switch rules, the slight confusion with switch rules is to drop with switch rule. There is no action drop. You define your action as new desport, no port. There, desport blank is drop. So, I am on PC1, it is hardware offloaded. Can I get to my web server on PC2? No, it is now blocked. It is blocked because I have taken that route through the packet flow diagram. Right, web server on PC4. PC1 is on a hardware offloaded port. PC4, is now on a non-hardware offloaded port as before. And I still cannot load my web server because I have gone through the packet flow, and this time was blocked. That one, PC4, was blocked with both the switch rule and the bridge forward rule. Can I get to webfig on my router? No. Because even to get into my router, because I have gone through the switching function, I have been blocked at layer 2. There. And can I load the internet? Also, no. Because no matter even to get to bridge input, I still go through the switching function. Switch ACL rules applied on ingress. I can also apply a switch rule on this part of the switching function because I can actually reference switch the port as switch CPU. I can't use switch CPU as a port inside router OS in the bridging function or the IP firewall, but I can in my switch rules, and I could now also use this to filter traffic. Say I had come from a non-switch port, e.g. my Wi-Fi, I don't have a demo of that, but if I were to come in from my Wi-Fi, it doesn't go through the switch chip, but if I was to use this rule, this would block traffic coming from the Wi-Fi or anywhere else that hasn't come inputted on the switch chip going out of a port that was connected to a switch. Now, I had to mark out of the slide earlier where the change has been made in the wiki that there are certain functions that have been moved or no longer documented as in the switching decision. So unfortunately, as of yesterday morning, we do not fully know where switch rules apply. They do not just apply in the switching decision. If you do testing, I recommend you do your own testing until the wiki is slightly clearer than what is written. Sorry, that I might need to reshade that for the print we'll put on the website later. The wiki now says that that switch ACL rules and other features may apply or can potentially be applied to interfaces that are not hardware offloaded, i.e. don't go through the switching decision but are connected to the switch chip. I have done some testing over the last few hours this morning with the HAP AC Square I brought with me. I have tested it on a CRS 326 that I happen to have with me. And I can tell you that if those ports are not in the bridge, but they are connected to a switch chip, it would seem that switch ACL rules apply to non-hardware offloaded ports that are connected to a switch chip. I am hoping that MikroTik will update the wiki over the next few days to make more information get rid of this ambiguity of potentially. I can also tell you that if you disable hardware offloading, not shown on the slide because I didn't have time to reprint to redo examples, but if I was to take a PC4 as my input, non-hardware offloaded, I can get to the web servers on PC1. Going through a non-hardware offloaded thing, it would block them, with the switch rule. This was from my testing this morning, straight after breakfast. No, before breakfast this morning was testing this, because when you spot this little addition to your presentation, you feel you've got to do something to address this. So, I would love to give you all the answers today. However, due to updates of yesterday, we do not have all the answers. So, if you are using ports connected to a switch, do your own testing. They may or may not be affected by actions on the switch rule, even if hardware offloaded, because there is a number of functions that are moved somewhere else in the switching function out of the switching decision box. Look at the block diagram. That will show you what ports are connected to the switch chip that may be affected. There are some of the CRS range that if you look at that block diagram, not all ports are connected to the switch chip. Some of them have one port, which is an out-of-bounds port. That goes straight into the CPU. So, look at the packet flow, look at the block diagram, do your own testing, see that things may or may not be blocked. There are a number of places that may or may not apply. Don't scratch your head too much, because it won't help. If you want to know more about all the power of VLAN filtering and all the functions that can be applied in Router OS with the new CRS range, there are some very powerful functions that you can do. If you have optimal configuration, you can get some very, very good switching setups using MikroTik, mainly the CRS range. If you want to know more, go on a MTC SWE course. We will unpick this packet flow diagram in several hours. I have CRS courses up and coming in the UK. Visit our website and you can see the dates that are up and coming. We have one published ready for October next, at the end of towards the end of this year. More dates are coming on our website readily as we publish more courses. Great. Thank you very much for listening. I am hoping that has unpicked some or more of confusion. I may have confused you more, but you now have some idea of where you are looking at the layer 2.
Oh, so any question? Wow. So you did a good job.
Yes. Yeah.
There is one.
I'm looking at, we have a blog. I don't have the URL for the blog yet, but when I find things, I do blog occasionally on the LinITX blog. So yeah, and I'm sure it will get updated because I have actually had email from MikroTik yesterday about it, but they didn't give me quite the answer I wanted.